First and foremost, welcome everybody. My name is Rob Jones. You'll be your host today. And my guests today are Corey Springett and Henriette Potgieter, both subject matter experts in the field of speech analytics, which we'll be talking about today. As most people, most contact center and CX professionals do realize that speech analytics is the big game changer in 2022 and going forward. And we'll be discussing this morning some of the pros and the cons and the features and advantages of using speech analytics in the CX environment. So without further ado, I'm going to first introduce Corey Springett. And Craig, you know Corey, but Corey comes with over 25 years in management and leadership in business intelligence and data analytics. And specifically around about 10 years, if I'm correct, Corey, in speech analytics, working with some of the big international US and UK brands in speech analytics. So today we're going to be talking about speech analytics in a generic sense as opposed to product orientation. So Corey, please, if you wouldn't mind coming in and just giving us a bit of a high level of, you've been in speech analytics, what, for 10 years now. What have you seen happening over that last 10 years, and specifically the changes in the South African environment and the use of speech analytics? Corey, to you.
So, Rob, firstly, thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be part of the panel. So speech analytics has always been sort of a hot topic, and unfortunately in the South African context is, I think the American vendors and specifically the international vendors being dollar-based could never get the price point correctly, and that was always a barrier to entry. You know, where you have a model in for instance, America that is 10% of an agent's cost makes sense in America, but where an agent is typically a tenth of the cost in South Africa, having a product that sells at the same price monthly as what the agent cost you was never economically viable. So that's been a big barrier to entry, and with the advent of some of the South African developed solutions like Corby, that's absolutely changed the paradigm, and we're seeing mass adoption of speech analytics in the South African market. The second barrier to entry has always been the lack of support for South African languages. South African English is not American English, UK English, or some hybrid version of international English. The accuracy rates were always very poor. And again, I'm going to focus specifically around Corby. It was developed specifically with the South African English language in mind, so the accuracy rates is well above the accepted norm for speech analytics in the South African context. But more importantly, we don't just speak English in South Africa. So with that in mind, you've asked me to start my video. So with that in mind, Corby was developed by way of example to support additional vernacular languages, so things like Zulu, Afrikaans, and Sotho are supported because we know the contact centers don't just speak one language in it. And the last one was typical barrier to entry that we've seen in the past is complexity. Speech analytics was complex, you needed specialized skills to drive it, and it was not fit for purpose for the contact center professional. You always needed this expert in the environment. And again, that has changed. You would have seen before Rod forced me to change my background logo. The company I work for, which is Corby, our motto is speech analytics made easy. It's been built for contact center professionals. Your team leads, your QA assessors, your contact center managers should be there to drive their own queries, own the tool, and build it out from there. So those have been the three big shifts for me in the South African context for speech analytics. The other one that said is, you know, there is no reason, and it's my passion and belief that speech analytics is essential to every contact center. It should be, for instance, if you are recording call recording, if you're recording your call, you should be analyzing them as well and listening to every call.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Corey. Henriette, if I can ask you to come in, a little bit of background. Henriette and I have worked together for many, many years, but she goes back 20 years in the industry. In operations, account management, back office, quality assurance, extensive work in BPOs, human resources, but with a passion for quality, if I'm correct. And we've worked together over the last couple of years. Henriette's also one of the very few certified COPC implementation leads in South Africa, so she comes with a lot of expertise in that area and has developed a passion, if I'm correct, for speech analytics. Henriette, you have a slide you want to bring up with the primary 4 use cases. I'm going to ask Henriette and Corey both to comment on the 4 main areas where we see speech analytics being deployed and the key drivers behind why so many contact centers are opting for this brand new technology, or not new technology, but more practical and more feasible technology. If you wouldn't mind popping that slide.
Perfect, right, I'll definitely do that. Corey, I'm going to bring it up. We can jointly talk through this. Let me just quickly share, if you can let me know as soon as you are seeing the screen. Let me just do full screen. Perfect. Can you see the slides?
Go to full screen and I'm good.
Perfect. So I'm just very briefly just going to touch on the strategic key drivers just in any call center in essence. Rod, you've mentioned my background is very much about call center best practice, process design, QA quality, but ultimately any business, what is the aim for your call center? You want to reduce cost, which is that top heading. You want to increase revenue. You want to improve your CSAT, your customer experience, and you want to ensure compliance. That's ultimately, if your business aims to do any one of those things, you're going to improve the performance of your business. Now, this slide now breaks it down to say, these are your top strategic use cases. But what does that mean? And what do you do with it? Corey, I don't know if you want to take over, just talking through some of these slides or some of these points.
Yeah, Henriette, just go to full screen, please, Henriette.
I am on full screen, right?
Okay.
Let's just quickly go back.
You are sharing a, that's for now it'll work, otherwise I can bring up this version of the slide.
Okay, that's fine. Go for it. Corey, your comment on these 4 drivers.
A couple of comments around it is, we make reference to automated quality and automated scoring at the bottom. And for me, speech analytics is not just about automating your scoring. Yes, it is one of the use cases, and yes, it typically falls under compliance and cost saving, but it's not the sole purpose, and that's a part of the slide. Is it's there to help you, for instance, reduce your operational costs. Things like which calls have long silent times is done, as a standard feature to identify which agents have, training issues, massive in-call silent time, or long post-call silent time, which might be an indication of agents taking advantage. Those are sort of out-of-the-box features that you can do off the bat. Same thing with cost saving. We are all driving to offload clients onto appropriate or digital channels. Which agents are promoting those digital channels on the appropriate calls, which agents are not. So it's visibility around what are the behaviors that the agents should be doing that is not being displayed, so you can address those. But more importantly, being able to track the effectiveness of how you've done the action, and did the action stick with the agent, and are they adhering to what they should be. Rod, you keep nudging me for my video. Apologies. I'm looking at the slide and forget about the video. The second one is around revenue generation. If you're an outbound sales organization, which agents are following things, for instance, like your sales process. The sales process typically has an opening and introduction, an offer, a benefit statement, and a close. You can track all of those in your speech analytics platform to ensure that the agents are complying to what ultimately will result in more business. And on that point, one of my sort of key drivers is the KPI systems that are in contact centers without speech analytics are very, very high level. Number of calls, average handle time, success rate. But what they fail to address is the individual behaviors that over time will result in success. In other words, does the agent follow the process consistently? Because we know if he does follow it consistently, it'll ultimately result in a higher success rate. Like I've given the example with the sales process, does he use the appropriate greeting, introduction, offer, benefit statement, and close? If he's not, which elements are missing? How do we address those? That ultimately all helps to improve the revenue. From a customer experience, yes.
Sorry, I just want to add on to that. You're talking KPIs. The KPIs, traditional KPIs, are also driving the wrong behavior. We're saying, fine, number of contacts, number of conversions, number of RPCs. We're going to measure you on the number of calls, your talk time. What do the agents then do? They ultimately only try and reach that goal. So whatever they do at the background to reach that number of calls, whether it's cutting calls, prolonging calls, whether it's selecting wrong wrap codes or disposition codes, because ultimately that's the output they get measured on. So I just wanted to add that on. I'm very passionate about that point as well.
I think that's a very good point, and I think it's a really good segue. And Henriette, if you can pick up then on the agent and customer experience component of it, because I think that speaks to what you've just addressed in this. And by the way, for registrants on the session, a little later, maybe in the next 15 minutes or so, I will ask both Corey and Henriette to actually demonstrate in a real environment some of these features. But please use the chat line or use the Q&A line. I'm monitoring it carefully. So if you want to see something specific, just drop me a quick note on that, and then we will certainly move into that in a more practical sense. So Henriette, if you would pick up on customer and agent experience, because those two seem to go along with what you've just introduced now. We've been driving, in my experience over 40 years in this industry, a lot of our KPIs have been production orientated and therefore driving totally incorrect agent behaviors. Back to you, Henriette.
Perfect. Thanks, Rod. So the next point I am going to touch, and I'm happy that you asked me. Like you said, I'm quite passionate about the customer experience side, but also the agent side, because I've been on both sides. I've been an agent in the call center. I know how the process is supposed to either support you to do what you must do, or how you are completely helpless in knowing what you must do. But I've also been a customer, and I've been on the other side where I'm just not getting resolution. I'm just not getting the answers I'm looking for. Speech analytics helps you to tap into those exact instances. It's no longer a guess to say, oh, maybe if somebody sometimes said it, perhaps I'm going to pick it up on a call. You've got access into every single conversation, every single keyword. I've got an example, and I'll obviously not mention any names, but I am currently battling with something I need resolved. I've been struggling for 2 weeks. I'm phoning. I have since used words like ombudsman, formal complaint. I need someone to resolve. I need to speak to a manager. 2 weeks later, nobody has contacted me back. With speech analytics, you can have an auto flag. Immediately, if those words are triggered based on how you built it, we can see the list. Somebody can click to that spot and they can assess and they can. That's why you get your list, you flag it, you address it, and everybody is happy. And you can realize where your process is hindering your agent. You can see where it's not the agent, but there's reasons why the agent couldn't do it.
Excellent. Henriette, if you would just prepare yourself in 10 minutes or so to actually show us how you would use technology to do exactly that, to overcome that particular problem. And that brings us now to compliance. Now, Corey, you've been 10 years hovering in the background, observing the use of speech analytics. And of course, compliance nowadays is a much bigger issue than it ever has been before, both in terms of legislative processes, regulatory environment, things like the POPIA compliances. And won't you pick up on that? Because I think it's a really important issue. And then once again, we'll look at a little later how we would use the technology to monitor for compliance. Corey, back to you.
Fantastic, thank you. And I want to circle back to an earlier point that Henriette made around agent behavior and how some of the traditional KPI measures impact your compliances. If you measure success rate as just being sales, but compliance is lacking, you might find specifically in insurance and such, the agents are selling things that shouldn't be sold, or in ways that shouldn't be sold, or they're not covering the T's and C's. So compliance is also there from a revenue perspective, but we do live in a regulated world. So compliance is critical, whether it's from a POPIA perspective, which is the new compliance that's come in that contact centers need to comply with, or your phase legislation, or any of the regulations, is to ensure that which calls are compliant, which calls are not compliant, not sample-based, but across the entire board. And if calls are not compliant, also to have that granular visibility in what is missing on that non-compliant call, and does what is missing warrant a redress. In other words, the agent missed this portion of it. Do we need to redress it, or can that go through? But the second part, and it's back to Henriette's earlier point about the agent experiences, I use a term called the peanut butter approach. It's not used in South Africa, but I often say we treat every agent the peanut butter way, which is you spread them the same way, and the interventions is the same way. The compliance example is a great example. If you are only struggling with one aspect as an agent of the compliance script, rather only address that aspect, then go through the high pity. Today we are doing the entire compliance script there, and he thinks he's doing it perfectly when he's missing one portion of it. It is far more effective. It's a massive cost saving and a time saver to focus on what the pain point is and address those, rather than to rehash the whole same old, in the peanut butter way. So with that in mind, compliance is not just to ensure the calls are regular or compliant or not, it is what is missing and how do we change that behavior and monitor it with the agents over time. And often, I don't know if Henriette's got a follow-on slide to this. For me, the benefit of speech analytics, all of these things add value, and this is how you make the business case. But the real benefit is to track agent behavior over time and the effectiveness of the interventions in changing the behavior, whether it's good behavior, which you want to see improve, or whether it's bad behavior you want to see deteriorate, is to get that 100% visibility, and it's quantifiable and it's measurable across the entire call population, so that you can see this agent is improving, the intervention is effective, or if the interventions are not effective, to change them to see, is there a better way of showing the agents what to do so that we can change the outcome.
Excellent. Thanks for that.
It is ultimately, and sorry, Rod, I just also want to mention the point here, is what the key thing about that, we're talking about the mind shift, but speech analytics enables you to get insights across all of your calls and all of your conversations. It ultimately gives you that objective view of what is happening. But then the key is, and Corey mentioned it now you need to take that and address and take action and track. So it's all about, you've got this tool, you've got the insights, you've got the ability to get all of that stuff. You now must use that to drive the necessary improvement and track whether it is effective.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Henriette. Now, I want to move into sort of a show and tell. So, in fact, Henriette, if you wouldn't mind teeing up, I'd like to see how would you use technology, for example, to identify that dreaded dead air time, that silences within calls, because this will take into a discussion around AHT, which of course has cost implications on that. So while you team that up, I think just some of the discussions we've had around speech analytics, I'm seeing 10 really good reasons why contact centers are using it. It's compliance, quality, agent behaviors, KPIs, processes, which is something else we'll need to talk about, ROI, show me the money, call center culture, how we can use speech analytics to modify culture, generating business intelligence as opposed to stats, driving efficiencies, and of course that whole big cost revenue model. So if anybody in the registrants have specific questions around any of these aspects of speech analytics, please just pop it in the Q&A section or the chat, and I'll get one of our specialists here, either Corey or Henriette, to actually show as opposed to talk about the application of that particular function of speech analytics. Henriette, take us into that dreaded silent time and AHT.
Perfect. So, Rod, you're happy that I do an actual practical demonstration?
Please
and we go through. Okay, I'm going to just share. Once again, let me know if you can see.
Yep,
you will see on here my demo environment. This is the Colby Speech platform. But let's talk that very first point that we had on the PowerPoint slide, or the use cases, where we are talking about agent efficiency. We are talking about dead air, silences, no one talking on your conversations. Now, firstly, just the implication of dead air on your call is, from a resourcing perspective, it essentially means that you've got more agents doing the work than what you effectively need. If agents are not talking, if agents are, there's silences, it effectively means if you can reduce those silences, it will result in less resources, where you can then use those agents for other things, more useful or more valuable, bringing in, making sales, etc. It will also point towards potential knowledge issues. If an agent has particular high silence, it could be that that agent is struggling. They're looking for someone to help them on the floor, or they don't know what the process is. They're busy searching knowledge base, something. It could be system related, where agents are, and we're seeing it a lot, work from home agents where there's connectivity problems, or specific applications, certain third-party applications, or anything. It could be system, but it could also be agent behavioral. So those are the implications of needing to understand your silence so that you can address. Now, I want to show you just by means of this, how you can effectively identify. So is the screen big enough, or should I just make it a bit bigger? Is it okay like this?
Yeah.
Perfect. So built into this speech platform is it calculates your total duration of your recording. So every single audio recording that you upload, firstly, it will calculate the duration from start to end. And this is what you will see attached to the call in this first column. Second, and this is actually a very nice example. I didn't mean to open it here, it just popped up. But second, it then calculates, because Colby detects speech, or speech platform detects speech, it calculates what part on that recording was there a conversation that took place. So someone conversing, words following in sequence of each other. Anything outside of that, meaning where there's either music or silence or background noise, there are no words following each other that is being transcribed, is then deemed as silence or dead air. Now you can see that that is expressed as a percentage across your recording. So that's the first thing, and I'm going to show you by means of a dashboard how you highlight your agents or teams or anywhere where there are high instances. Further, just what it does here is it also looks and it shows you what part of your silence was after the conversation ended. Typically in call centers, this is where the customer put down the phone, but the agent did not end the call. A lot of times we see here, and we will see answering machine, an outbound agent who will dial, will reach the answering machine, but they will let that the message loop for a minute, 40 seconds, because it means they don't need to set ready for the next call. Maybe they're busy capturing rap notes or doing something else, but that is what will then show that post-conversation bit. I'm quickly just going to take you into a dashboard. Now, using your dashboards, you can use this silences attached to your calls. And this is fully customizable, but you can go identify specific calls with specific conditions. In this case, we've asked to see all calls per agent longer than a minute, but the silence percentage on that call is more than 40%. Now here you can sort, you can identify where you've got potential problems. Remember on here, you can group this either by team, by department, by call center, dependent on what level you're busy investigating. But then from here, when you click, it will take you to those calls. And from here again, we can see here there's a 50% silence, a 59% silence, a 73% silence. We can dive deeper by clicking, and it will take us to that place. The transcript is attached. You can either listen to the recording or immediately this flat spot. We can see this is where the conversation ended. We can jump there. Thank you, bye. And then that recording continued. So that's a very practical demonstration, but that's how you identify. And you can group it by minute. You can see how much time you're losing in minutes based on cumulative silent time across your calls.
And I think that's a very good demonstration of the value of being able to identify this wasted time. And one of the questions I ask at every one of my seminars of call center managers is what is the cost per minute to handle an interaction in your call center? Tragically, very few people can actually answer that, but let's assume that it's R4 or R5 per minute. Every second that's ticking away there is still costing the organization money. Corey, on that score, can you come in on this as well, Corey? Your passion is scorecards, and particularly quality scorecards. And I've heard you speak before on the need to change the way in which we measure agent performance. Would you take us into that space on how would you set up an automated scorecard? Because as an operational manager, I would love to be able to, first thing in the morning, look at all of my agents from yesterday. How did they perform across 5 or 6 key metrics? Without having to go to my QA team to say, sit and listen to hours and hours of conversations and score it on your QA score sheet.
Absolutely. With absolute pleasure. If you can allow me to share the screen, I'm actually going to build out an automated scorecard and take it from there. But before I do, I wanted to add a twist to Henriette's conversation time, and obviously it's let's call it the other side of the coin to silent time, is where you have successful calls. So you have access to the disposition code within Corby if it was loaded, to say I've got a successful call, but it is far below the accepted norm. Let's say a sales call takes 5 minutes, but I'm getting a pattern where I've got an agent that's pushing through 1 minute successful sales calls. Are those legitimate successful sales calls? Are they gaming the system? Have they discovered a way to do things differently to everyone else that we can learn from? Or more importantly, are they missing certain of the steps to ensure it's a proper successful call? So that call duration has many aspects if you overlay it with the analytics as well as the metadata to take it from there. Rod, if I can share my screen. I'm going to, where is my Corby screen? Oh, there we go. Just confirm you can see my screen.
I got your screen.
Obviously, one of the capabilities from Corby is the ability to build automated scorecards. But for me, scorecards is not just about quality. I've got this hobby horse. I know people. I apologize about quality. Quality is one use case. But for instance, if you had a sales process, and I touched on it earlier on when we were speaking about use cases, there's an opening, there's an introduction, there's an offer, there's a benefit statement, there's a close. You can track that in a scorecard, and it's a really nice way to visualize it. So let me go and create a scorecard. I'm going to say this is for our webinar. My visualization type I want to create is a scorecard. And then firstly, I can group it by a number of groupings. So I can decide I want to create a team scorecard, I want to create a contact center scorecard, or I want to create an agent scorecard. And you can do any combination of those on your dashboard so that I can have side-by-side dashboards. If I'm let's say a contact center manager, I want to see how my teams are performing. If I'm a team leader, I want to see how my agents are performing. So that ability to create drill down scorecards is vital. So I'm going to, in this example, say I want to create a scorecard by agent. I can also introduce a second grouping. So I can see by agent, by client, by way of examples. So in that example, I can track calls that go across a number of, a sale that goes across a number of calls to track that process. But I'm just going to simplify it for the sake of the webinar. So I want to create a scorecard by agent. Now what I do is I'm going to load the queries that is relevant to me. So in my first example, I've got a compliant query. I want to make sure that the compliancy was done. I've got an ID number query. So I want to make sure that the ID number was confirmed by way of example. And for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to spin it and create a third measure. I can also introduce weightings. So typically in the QA context, certain things carry a heavier weighting than others. But in this example, I'm going to say I'm tracking a hypothetical sales process. Did he confirm the compliance? Did he confirm the ID number? And did he confirm the financial notes? So I'm going to go and create my scorecard. I just want to shrink your little Corby screen because it's sitting in my way. And there, let me change my date period to my retention period. For those of you who've done demos with me before, we have a standard 3-month retention period within Corby, but my data set's a little bit older. Now for the period I'm looking at, it could be any period I want to look at. So I can look at my period, for instance, I can do comparative scorecards, 24, 48 hours, or any custom date range. I can see by agent, their total number of calls, their overall compliance score, but more importantly for the queries I'm tracking, and my third one didn't load, apologies, I'll fix that up later, but let's just say I'm tracking compliant and ID number. I can see exactly which agents are struggling with what and where to base my intervention. So agent 1 gets the ID number wrong. Agent 2 sort of gets it, but not completely. Agent 4 gets it completely wrong. Agent 5 has it, and agent 6 doesn't have it. And that is across 100% of the calls. So you have now quantifiable empirical evidence as to where they're struggling and how to address that behavior. I can obviously also export this into Excel that I can use downstream. And this is automated. Every time a new batch of calls arrive, it'll automatically update my scorecard, and it'll then create the new metrics that I'm tracking.
Corey, you raised an interesting point there. How long after an actual call is the analytics available? What is the lag time?
Rod, it's a kettle. It's a sort of a boiling pot that you bring up, and let's chat around analytics, speech analytics, and this whole concept that sometimes pops out about real-time analytics. So firstly, real-time analytics is a bit of a an anomaly in the sense that if you knew something happened on a call, now can you intervene on it? The answer normally is no. So typically what you're looking for from an analytics perspective, you want to look back, and you can look back in a number of ways. I want to see today what happened yesterday so that I can address the behaviors in today's session. Or if it's a little bit closer to real time, I want to sort of have a window and check in every 2 or 3 hours. So from a call view perspective, typically we see most clients doing end of day uploads. So the next day they have their visibility, but we also have clients, and one of them is on the call, where they upload every 45 minutes. It takes about an hour to transcribe that upload. And then within an hour, you have your results set. So you can get within 2 hours of real time to get the insights if the use cases determine that. Typically, we see frequent uploads if it's a big contact center. So if you're running 1,000, 1,500 agents through Corby, it takes time to upload this. You want to break that down instead of a once a day to every 45 minutes.
Okay, excellent. Thanks on that.
And on that, I just again want to add. So once you've set up your query, once you've done validation, once you've set up your dashboards, it's an automatic update. So as the call gets loaded, it gets processed. You get your result, you click on your dashboard, and it's there.
Yeah.
Okay. Henriette, in fact, I'm going to ask you on this one. There's been a specific question. If one of the fundamental principles of speech analytics is to identify and track individual words and phrases, won't you please just show very briefly how you set up a typical query? And I think the one I'd like to see is there's more and more pressure on agents, excuse me, to engage with customers to get POPIA compliance and opt-in confirmations. I know it's a massive issue. I'm dealing with a couple of clients at the moment. So how would I use speech analytics to identify, which agents are following the mandated and the specific and trained process, and who aren't? And then as a supervisor, team leader, what would you do once you see your results on that with the agents who, for example, are not following the process? Okay, over to you.
I'll do that. Thanks, Rod. Screen shared. Can you see the screen?
Confirm.
Okay, perfect. So you'll see this is obviously my demo environment. I've already created some queries, but I'm going to create a new one from scratch just to show you. In essence, what your query is, because you are able to look for text matches through all of your transcripts, you build your query to go look for certain conditions. Now, this is based on query builder logic, but let's quickly build one for compliance. And I'm going to use the opt-in or marketing consent as we would previously have known it. So marketing consent, we want to check if the agent did ask. You can give it a description. I'm not going to give it one for now. Don't worry about these tags. It's demonstration purposes. This is related to the query validation process, which there's a full process to ensure that your query is ultimately accurate, that you need to run through to check your query. But how you build, you simply go add the text matches you're looking for. So marketing consent, consent, future, etc., etc. So you will look, my statement says, do you provide consent for us to market? Let's add. And so you will build out your statement. There's various conditions you can search for. You can say whether the phrase must be absent or present. Are you only looking for client side, agent side, or anywhere in your conversation? You can then also just set your proximity. So how close to each other in your transcript do you want these words to be? Are you allowing other words in between? So you can set your condition. You can go as complex as you need to. But now that you've done this, you are essentially searching and saying, go search through my selection of calls and show me any call that matches that condition. So you'll see now first on this query, when we click, it will take us, do you consent marketing services? So already there, it takes you and it hits that specific spot. From here, you can also identify the non-matched, meaning they didn't do what they were supposed to do. So that's firstly just your query setup. I've already got a query that was refined a bit earlier. So you'll just see here the marketing consent query. Once you've got that query from your dashboards, I'll take you quickly into that specific dashboard. And this is where your team leader will then access it. I just quickly need to go have a look at scorecards. Or let's actually just create a new one for you. You will simply add, we are interested in Poppy consent, but right now we want to see Poppy marketing consent. Not done. Because this is what the supervisor is interested in. I want to see a list and I want to see it per agent. Oh, let's just select that again. Perfect. I'm just trying to select now. This thing is in the way. That's it. Perfect. I want to see number of calls. So I add, I now filter. All I'm going to say is go show me all my calls where that specific query, the marketing consent is not matched, which means it is where the agent did not say the necessary words. Now that you've got this, you've got your list. Your team leader has access, can click. Again, you've got your calls. You can click. We'll go to the spot in the call if anything is highlighted. If not, can check and can use this to coach.
Excellent. Any questions from the floor, please just pop it in the text box or put your hand up and we'll bring you in live. Great stuff. That's I think a very practical way of looking at how individual words and phrases can influence the outcome of particular calls, etc. Corey, your turn now. Won't you please just give us an overview of how the word cloud works in the speech analytics platform and the value of a word cloud? Do you have an example that you can share?
I'll create an example quickly, Chris, and let me share my screen again. Just confirm you can see my screen. So there's a couple of, firstly, before we create a word cloud, I want to chat around word clouds in general in terms of what is their real purpose. So word clouds is there to draw your attention to things happening in the call, whether it's expected or unexpected, and it's the basis for the hypothesis to see what's happening. I'm going to share a real world story first, and then I'm going to go create a word cloud. So let me bring up a couple of word clouds. Just out of interest, the Corby's got a unique capability. I can surface any number of word clouds on a dashboard, and I can filter the word cloud in any number of ways. So I can go as a team leader, create a word cloud for each of my team members to see what is happening in the conversations, and is there something that's popping out. But I got a story to share, and then I'm going to show. So one of our early clients, the very first word cloud we created for them in training had the word postbox in it. We thought nothing of it. They got very excited, and it turns out they retired the postbox script 2 years ago and thought all of the agents were using the postbox script. The reality was different. 30% of their 300 odd agents were still using the postbox script, and that was an immediate 45-second saving of 30% of their calls. That very paid for Corby for the entire year, just that one surprise find. But let me go into my queries. We're going to build a simple query to say, I want to look at problem calls, and I want to try and analyze what my call driver is for my problem calls. So just a comment, I'm not here to show off the tool, but one of the things the team is very proud of is the Corby interface is conversation driven. So I can see exactly what are the words I'm looking for. Was it or wasn't it said by whom and in what proximity? But in this example, I'm just going to focus on the word cloud. I'm looking for all calls where the word problem or problems occurred, but not the word no problems. If I look at the word cloud, it is very apparent. If I look at it, it's the app user password wrong are the dominant words across the calls that I brought back. So my theory can then be the bulk of these calls are about the users getting their app password wrong, in which case then I can start driving through my further analysis. But in addition to the word cloud, we've also implemented within Corby something called a topic cloud. And the idea of the topic cloud is to look at a word in context to its preceding and subsequent words to try and get a feel for how this word is being used in a conversation. I have a small data set, but let me go and drive through a bigger data set and give an example of this so that you guys can see how the topic cloud works, so that I can drive it through. I'm just going to pick on any query, and I'm going to say, I'm going to pick a word to say, let's pick the first one. I want the word repayment. And on repayment, I can go, whoops, we
Remember your date, Corey.
No, this should be all of it. Oh, I must change my date.
Date filter.
Henriette, I got to push back out of my period. Well spotted. Thank you. There's interest, so I can see interest charge and interest fees. So I can get a good feel for how this word is being used in the context of the conversation. Again, it's a really nice visualization to say if a customer, for instance, said, I'm unhappy, what is the context of unhappy? So I can drive through further investigation of that. Rod, that is me.
Okay.
Back to you.
That's great. Thanks, Corey. We've just had a very nice question come in from Linda, who asked about, can we use the information in a transcription to populate a form downline? And I think this brings us to the point about speech analytics, where we have a transcription, we have text, we have the ability to analyze that text. Now, what can we do with the actual transcriptions further down the line? That's really into your court, Corey.
Rod, with pleasure. Let me share my screen again. Queries and transcriptions, right?
Yeah, and the question is, basically, is there a possibility or functionality that will capture the information provided by a client into a form? Interesting challenge.
Henriette, I'm going to pass this one to you. Because I'm trying to think of how I'm going to do that, but I can't think off the fly in terms of capturing it into a form, but I know Henriette will know how to do this one.
Yeah, so I think the quick answer is currently right now, if you're straight on looking for an auto capture from a conversation into a form format, no, that's not available. You do have, because you've got access to your transcripts, and I'm quickly going to just share that you can download the transcripts and have access to the text within those transcripts. So it is possible from there, and I'm sure with some clever coding and everybody else, once you've got the access, you should be able to pre-populate forms, but it's not currently a functionality that is supported. I'm just going to share, I just want to show you just the format of the actual transcript.
Henriette, I'm going to, while you're showing that, on that point, I'm going to turn the question around a little bit. Rod, I don't often see this pre-population question coming up, but what I often see is recategorization of calls. So in other words, the agent flagged a call, and let's use a collection example as a right party contact call, but was it a right party contact call? And can I then visualize how many calls are either incorrectly dispositioned and or what was the accurate one? I spoke to a client recently where they wanted to, for instance, see how many calls are about the client complaining about service, product, store, brand, which is typically not disposition code. So there I can recategorize, I can create categories and dashboard and visualize it to say how many customers called to complain about the store yesterday, or called to complain about a particular brand over the last couple of months, or called to complain about a specific individual. So that type of form input you can do in Corby is to say, how can I use Corby or speech analytics to classify calls or reclassify calls so I can track and trend those in my dashboards.
Okay, excellent. I think we're back to you, Henriette. Now, we're looking at your screen here. We're looking at the actual transcription of the call.
So from this transcript, it is downloadable. So if you do need to have the text or somewhere outside of system, you can download, and you will then have everything available in text format. This is now a very short call, but once again, then if you need to then populate from here, you've got what was said. If that is the pure just wanting to populate into a form. No, you can, like Corey mentioned, you can, by means of your query, build queries that will identify the exact spot in the conversation where the question is asked. For instance, please provide me your ID number, your cell phone number, your whatever else you need to provide. That again is quicker for anybody who needs to double check the information to just go to that spot in the call, because the query will highlight, it will match, you open up on that spot, and it's a quick 5-second checking through everything and moving on. So it's all about saving time also at the end of the day when it can't auto-populate.
Okay, so in that scenario, the agent would ask a specific question. Please give me your ID number. So as you saw on those other ones, am I correct? The speech bubbles will be separated by, and in fact, I think, Corey, that's a question which comes up quite often is how accurate is that speaker separation in the transcripts?
Fantastic, great question. So if the client records in stereo, speaker separation is 100% accurate. If the client records in mono, which is often the case, it is not a problem. So we have an algorithm that will infer speakers and do the separation for you. But obviously, where the speakers sound similar, there's some bleed over. But even if the speaker sounded exactly and you can't separate it, often queries are driven to say, were certain phrases present? So in other words, was an ID validation done? So did somebody asked for ID number? So if I can't separate the speakers, was the phrase present? If I know it's present, I know it was spoken about. So, or you can say ID validation, and I know that was covered regardless of who the speaker was.
Right. Now, my question, in fact, is the accuracy of that transcription, where we have people with different accents, we have audio quality, we have recording quality. How accurate are those transcriptions and how reliable? And the other, somebody else has asked the question, how do you handle when a conversation might start in English and then go to vernacular and then back to English? How do you handle that? I think who's going to answer that one?
I'll pick that one up.
You go.
I'll pick that one up. So let's just chat around firstly transcription accuracy and query accuracy and the difference on it. So globally, the accepted norm and best practice for transcription accuracy, in other words, taking the spoken language and turning it into text, is 70%. And there's a number of sites that will benchmark some of the big international ones, and they're all sort of 68 to 74%. From a Corby perspective, because we were specifically built for the South African languages, our accuracy rates are typically between 75 and 85%, but there's a number of factors that influence how accurately the transcripts are done. And some of those factors that influence it is the compression rate on the audio files, how well the agent pronounces their words, how noisy the contact center environment is, how good of quality the microphone on the headset is. But that said, our benchmark for clients from a query accuracy perspective is 90% plus query accuracy. And the reason why you can have a much higher query accuracy to transcription accuracy is you can cater for transcription errors within the query. I'm going to give a real world example. We have a client named Schlanger, and one of the checks they do is an ID validation. In other words, did the agent ask for the client's ID number? But with the Durban accent, sometimes when the agent pronounces the word ID, it sounds like me, and it gets transcribed as me number. So in that example, the client had built a query to say, I'm looking for all calls where the phrase ID number is present, or the phrase me number is present, in which case they will get 100% query accuracy because you cater for the transcription error and the mispronunciation.
Excellent. We're coming up on time. I'm going to ask Henriette something else, which is, I know your passion for call center quality and agent performance, etc. So here we have new technology that listens to every single call. So a change on culture. We have Big Brother is watching everything. So is there a downside of that in terms of agents or agent performance, or does it drive the correct behavior? And as a, let's call it a team leader or a supervisor or a manager, how do you make sure that using this type of technology drives the right performance on the one hand, but equally important, drives the right culture in the contact center? It's a big question, but
yeah, you've hit the nail right on the head. I wouldn't call it a downside, but there is definitely a change management process or need when you implement something like this. If you're using away from a traditional based QA sampling based or anything else where you've got a human ear listening, your initial kickback will be from either the team leaders, the supervisors, the managers, or the agents that you're now trying to catch them out, because it's 100% of course. It's part of that process to understand the change management that goes with it. It starts with firstly identifying your strategic key driver. Start by not trying to eat the whole elephant in one go. Start with small bits.
Mhm.
Start with the things that will give you the most value firstly. From there, build out 1 or 2 queries. Go onto the floor, start providing feedback. But part of that change management is also allowing the team leaders, everybody, access to start understanding how the system operates. That will drive the right behaviors. Once that change management happens, you will get the buy-in where everybody will understand it is ultimately to improve and identify where we can support, or then where really we need to do intervention, we will do intervention. Across the floor, agents will also realize the ones who are really causing or having behavioral issues, now they are being addressed, versus the ones who require training and coaching support, they're being coached. The key thing, and that's, I just want to really, it's about your change management process. It's not something you just throw in there and it runs. You need to go through your process of change management, but then you're there.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Henriette. And Corey, just from a wrap up from your perspective, your passion shows, and during the last couple of years that you've been involved driving into the South African market in particular, what are the key points that stand out for you as the benefits of using speech analytics technologies? You've got, what, 60, 70 clients now using the tool. And what's really standing out for you as the key drivers here?
Rod, outside of almost rehashing what Henriette had said earlier around improving sales, reducing operational costs, compliance, and all of those, I want to leave it as an analogy, because the benefit of speech analytics is massive. I mean, we can cover the four typical corners, but there are new use cases we bump into every day, Popgieter being a new one. Things like monitoring racial slur on calls, profanities, and that type of thing. But how I want to close my section off is, if you, with your partner or your children, who are only listening to 5% of the conversations, can you really draw accurate conclusions in terms of what is really going on? Or do you have a high-level best guess at worst, and often you miss the context, or you get the context completely wrong? And that, to me, is where speech analytics comes to. It's no longer good enough in the era of the customer that we are listening to a fraction of the calls. They're typically out of context, to try and then manage agents and behaviors and change behaviors and build interventions based on such a small sample rate, and then hope for an outcome that is going to be great. You know, it's best guessed at best, where you want that visibility. And we often say it, and I've taken it to heart, is speech. And if you're recording your audio, you should be analyzing every one of those calls. You've taken the effort and time and cost to record the audio. Why not then invest in the technology to analyze and make sure that what you're getting from the recordings is optimized, so that you can make informed business decisions rather than making decisions based on half information.
Excellent. Well, we've come to just about the top of the hour on this, so I think it's really my role now to say thank you both. For Henriette, thank you for your participation and for sharing your passion for contact centers per se. And similarly, Corey, thanks so much. You kept the reins on. You didn't do the big sales pitch, which was the objective of today's session. But to anybody on the call, please, if you would like a full-on product demonstration, Corey's the guy that does it. Does it all in about 45 minutes. And just drop me a line and I'll do the introductions and set it up for you. We'll also be sending out to those who flagged the tick box in the registration an information pack. Most of it is generic about speech analytics per se. There is one or two pieces of information about the products. But thank you so much to everybody for participating in this. Please go to the Thought Leadership Foundation website. It's thoughtleadership.co.za. Register as a member of the management forum, and you'll get invited to similar discussions, product information where appropriate. But we're really trying to stimulate knowledge sharing, information sharing, and business networking in the South African CX contact center environment. So thank you once again to everybody for participating. Hope you enjoyed it. I will publish a edited version of the recording later today. It'll be considerably shorter, and I'll give you those links to share with your colleagues. Thanks once
Yes.
again, Henriette.
Thank you,
Corey,
Rod. Thank you,
and
Corey.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
everybody on that call. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.